There is a particular kind of heartbreak that does not announce itself loudly. It does not always arrive with slammed doors or final words or a clean ending you can point to and name. Sometimes it arrives in the silence after the message that never comes. In the habit of checking your phone, though you already know better. In the way your body still braces for someone who is no longer yours to wait for. And sometimes the deepest ache is not only that you lost a person, but that somewhere inside that loss, you also misplaced your steadiness, your innocence, your sense of being safely held in your own life. So come close for a moment. Not with your defenses, not with the face you wear for other people. Come close with the tired part of you, the part that still wonders why it hurts this much, the part that feels embarrassed by how long grief has stayed, the part that loves sincerely, perhaps too sincerely, and now does not know what to do with all the tenderness that has nowhere to go. This message is for that part of you. It is drawn from an original source that speaks of putting salt in your shoes, of walking with purpose, of moving through life with something sacred beneath your feet. But today, let us bring that image closer to the wounds people carry after love has fallen apart. Because when your heart has been bruised by disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, emotional neglect, or the slow erosion of being unseen, you need more than a clever ritual. You need a way to understand what pain has done to you. You need a way to stop worshiping the wound, and you need a way to return to yourself without pretending that nothing broke. Perhaps part of heartbreak is this. It confuses what happened with who you are. Someone leaves and suddenly you do not just feel left, you feel lessened. Someone betrays you and suddenly you do not just feel hurt, you feel foolish. Someone withholds love, affection, honesty, or consistency, and after a while you begin to wonder whether the hunger inside you is evidence that you were too much, too needy, too difficult to love well. But that is one of heartbreak's cruelest lies. Pain will try to make a home inside your identity. It will whisper, "This happened because you were not enough." And if you do not challenge that lie, you may start building your life around it. That is why the image of salt matters here. Salt preserves, salt cleanses, salt protects what should not be left to decay. And after heartbreak, there are pieces of you that must be preserved on purpose. Your dignity must be preserved. Your tenderness must be preserved. Your capacity to love must be preserved. Not because everything should remain the same, but because pain has a way of making people abandon the very parts of themselves that were most alive before they were hurt. They stop trusting their own discernment. They apologize for their own feelings. They become suspicious of their own softness. They shrink. Not because they are weak, but because disappointment has taught them to brace before they even enter the room. So when I say, in the spirit of that original message, put salt in your shoes, I am not asking you to perform something magical. I am asking you to walk as though your spirit is still worth protecting. I am asking you to stop stepping through your days as if your heart is disposable. I am asking you to remember that just because something wounded you does not mean it gets to define the rest of your life. And yes, salt also burns. That matters too. Because healing after heartbreak is not always gentle at first. Sometimes truth stings before it steadies. Sometimes what cleanses you is not comforting in the beginning. It hurts to admit that you were begging for crumbs and calling it connection. It hurts to admit that you kept rereading old messages, not because they held wisdom, but because they let you feel close to what was already gone. It hurts to admit that you were waiting for closure from someone who never had the emotional maturity to offer it. It hurts to admit that part of you still confuses longing with love. But pain that tells the truth can become holy in its own way. Not because suffering is noble, not because heartbreak makes you special, but because there is dignity in admitting what broke you instead of pretending you are untouched. There is power in saying, yes, this wounded me. Yes, I still ache. Yes, some mornings I wake up already carrying the weight of memory. But I will not let this turn me into a stranger to myself. One painful truth many people discover too late is that heartbreak often behaves like withdrawal. That is why you can know in your mind that someone was inconsistent, unavailable, manipulative, dishonest, or simply incapable of loving you in a safe and steady way and still crave them with your whole body. The body remembers patterns even when the soul has grown tired of them. The nervous system can become attached to uncertainty, especially if uncertainty feels familiar. This is why people sometimes miss what harmed them. Not because the harm was good, but because it was known. And when pain is familiar, peace can feel strangely empty at first. Have you ever noticed how quiet healing can feel in the beginning? Almost too quiet. No dramatic highs, no desperate checking, no wondering what mood they will be in, no sudden sweetness after cold distance, no emotional whiplash, just stillness, just ordinary time. Just your own company asking to be trusted again. For a wounded heart, that kind of peace can feel almost unbearable before it feels beautiful. This is why so many people go back. Not always because the love was true, but because the chaos was familiar. So ask yourself gently, not with judgment, but with honesty. Am I grieving the person? Or am I grieving the pattern? Am I missing who they truly were? Or am I missing the hope of who I kept asking them to become? Am I mourning love? Or am I mourning the dream attached to them? Those are not small questions. They can open doors in the soul. Because many heartbreaks are not only about losing a person, they are about losing the imagined future you built around that person, the home that never came to be, the softer version of life you kept trying to earn, the belief that if you were patient enough, loving enough, understanding enough, then one day the relationship would finally become what it kept promising but never consistently delivered. And there's grief in that. Real grief. Not dramatic, not childish, not weak. Real grief. You are not ridiculous for mourning what could have been, but healing may begin when you stop feeding the fantasy more than the truth. You cannot keep watering a memory that can no longer grow and then wonder why your hands are tired. You cannot keep carrying a house key to a door that no longer opens and call that loyalty. At some point, love for your own life must become stronger than attachment to what hurt you. That does not happen all at once. Usually, it happens in very small, almost invisible acts of self-return. You stop listening to the voice note that ruins your whole evening. You decide not to reread the conversation that always makes you question your worth. You eat something nourishing even when your appetite is gone. You go outside though part of you wants to hide in the dimness of your room. You tell the truth to a friend instead of saying, "I'm fine." You let yourself cry without turning the tears into a courtroom where you prosecute your own heart. Little by little, you stop treating the wound like a shrine. And I know how tender this territory is. Because after heartbreak, many people are not just sad, they are ashamed. Ashamed they stayed so long. Ashamed they ignored what was obvious. Ashamed they tolerated confusion, inconsistency, disrespect, emotional starvation. Ashamed they called it love, when sometimes it was really fear of being left, fear of being alone, fear that this might be the closest thing to being chosen they would ever receive. But let me tell you something with as much gentleness as I can. Your shame will not heal you. It will only keep you kneeling before a past that already took enough. You did what many human beings do when they are hungry for love. You hoped. You attached meaning. You gave chances. You tried to see the best. You waited longer than you should have. You confused endurance with devotion. You thought that staying proved your depth. There is no need to romanticize that, but there is also no need to despise yourself for it. The lesson is not that you were stupid for loving. The lesson is that love without safety can become self-abandonment if you are not careful. That is why the preserving power of salt matters so much after emotional loss. You must preserve your self-respect before bitterness gets to it. You must preserve your inner truth before loneliness talks you into settling again. You must preserve your memory accurately so that missing someone does not erase the reality of what happened. Because heartbreak has a way of editing the story. It highlights the tenderness and blurs the damage. It replays the beautiful moments and mutes the nights you cried yourself to sleep. It makes you reach for the one warm memory while ignoring the long season of being unseen, unsure, and emotionally underfed. And if you are not careful, you will begin to think healing is betrayal. You will think that letting go means the love meant nothing, but letting go does not mean it meant nothing. It means it meant enough for you to tell the truth about it. It means you are finally refusing to confuse suffering with devotion. It means you are choosing not to drag old chains into a life that still has room for peace. So if your heart is tired tonight, if you are lying there replaying old scenes and trying to understand why you still ache for what hurt you, begin here. Do not ask first whether you can stop loving them. Ask whether you are ready to stop leaving yourself behind. Do not ask whether the memory still has beauty. Ask whether it still has authority over your peace. Do not ask whether they ever loved you in some partial, broken way. Ask whether that love was steady enough to protect the life inside you. Those questions may sting a little. Truth often does when it first touches an open place. But that sting is not cruelty. It is cleansing. It is the soul beginning to choose clarity over fantasy, dignity over begging, and life over longing. And once that choosing begins, however quietly, something sacred starts to return. Not all at once, not in a rush, but like breath coming back to a room that has been closed too long. Because you, dear heart, were never meant to rot inside somebody else's inability to love you well. You were never meant to live forever in the hallway between what was and what should have been. You were never meant to measure your value by who stayed confused about it. There is more of you to recover than you know. There's more peace available to you than your pain would have you believe. And there's a way to walk forward, even now, with something holy beneath your feet. In the next part, we will go deeper into what it means to walk with intention after heartbreak, to stop moving through life as a wounded echo of what happened and begin stepping again as someone slowly, bravely returning to their own soul. After heartbreak, many people keep moving, but they are no longer truly walking. They are reacting. They are surviving. They are answering messages, showing up at work, making meals, paying bills, smiling when required, and collapsing in private. From the outside, life may look intact, but inwardly, there is often a kind of drifting. A person can become so consumed with getting through the day that they stop asking where their life is actually going. This is one of the quiet costs of emotional loss. It does not only break the heart, it can scatter direction. That is why intention matters so deeply now. Because when love has bruised your confidence, you are especially vulnerable to wandering. You may wander back into old conversations that reopen the wound. You may wander into new attention that flatters you but does not honor you. You may wander into busyness just to avoid hearing your own grief breathe. You may wander into self-blame, analyzing every detail as though pain can be solved if you think hard enough. But healing is not only about what you stop doing. It is also about how you begin to walk again. To walk with intention after heartbreak means you no longer let your pain decide your direction. It means you stop handing the steering wheel to loneliness. It means you begin asking different questions. Not how do I get them back, but what kind of life am I building from here? Not how do I prove I was worth loving, but how do I live in a way that no longer requires me to beg for what should be given freely? Not why did they choose this, but what do I choose now? Those questions can feel almost too simple beside a great sorrow. Yet often, healing begins there, not in dramatic revelation, but in a shift of orientation. You start to understand that every step you take is planting something. Every step. The way you speak to yourself in the morning plants something. The people you answer plant something. The boundaries you betray or uphold plant something. The memories you keep rehearsing plant something. The future is not built only by major decisions. It is shaped by repeated emotional movements that either deepen your freedom or strengthen your captivity. So what are you planting when you go back, again and again, to the one who starved your spirit? What are you planting when you keep checking whether they noticed your absence? What are you planting when you tell yourself that scraps should be enough? Because at least scraps are something. One painful truth many people discover is that heartbreak can train the soul to accept less than peace, simply because less than peace still feels like connection. But connection without safety is not the same as love. Intensity without consistency is not the same as devotion. And chemistry without care is not the same as home. Walking with intention means you begin to recognize that not every pull should be followed. Some urges are not wisdom, they are withdrawal. Some longings are not prophecy, they are habit. Some hopes are not noble, they are fear dressed in beautiful language. This is why the image from the original source becomes so meaningful when applied to heartbreak. Salt in your shoes can become a private way of saying, I will not step toward what dishonors my peace. I will not enter rooms where I must make myself smaller to be tolerated. I will not keep walking toward people who only know how to love me when it is convenient for them. And yes, that kind of intention can feel lonely at first. It can feel severe. It can feel like you are denying yourself the very thing you crave. Because sometimes the heart is not craving what is healthy. It is craving what is familiar. That distinction matters. Missing someone does not always mean they were right for you. Longing is not always evidence of alignment. There are moments when the body reaches for what the soul has already begun to outgrow. And in those moments, intention becomes mercy. Not punishment, mercy. Have you ever had to sit on your hands to keep from sending the message? Have you ever had to talk yourself through an evening because every part of you wanted to reopen a door that had already crushed you once before? Have you ever known with clarity that going back would wound you and still felt the ache to go? That is where intentional healing becomes holy work. Because in those moments, you are not only resisting a person, you are resisting the version of yourself that believed pain was the price of closeness. This is why recovery after heartbreak must become practical, not just emotional. You cannot heal only in theory. You need structure for your tenderness. You need small acts that teach your life a new rhythm. Perhaps you stop keeping their photographs within reach when you know one glance can pull you under for hours. Perhaps you stop visiting the digital places where you quietly injure yourself by looking for signs. Perhaps you decide that when the ache rises at night, you will write what you feel instead of sending it to the person who taught you not to feel safe. Perhaps you begin taking walks without your phone, just long enough to hear your own thoughts return to you. Perhaps you make a list called What Was True and fill it not with fantasies but with facts, so that when nostalgia edits the story, truth can answer back. This is not about becoming hard. It is about becoming honest. There is a difference. Hardness says, I will never feel again. Honesty says, I will feel fully, but I will not lie to myself about what feeling means. Hardness shuts the heart down. Honesty teaches the heart how to stay open without staying unprotected. And after heartbreak, that distinction can save you. Because many people think healing means becoming unbothered. But often healing looks more like becoming discerning. You still feel the pull, but you no longer obey it blindly. You still miss them, but you no longer build your days around that missing. You still have moments when memory softens everything, but you return again and again to the fuller truth. You remember not just the sweetness, but the confusion, not just the closeness, but the inconsistency, not just the hope, but the cost. And little by little, intention starts giving your life back to you. You wake up and realize an entire morning passed without checking for signs. You laugh once, then notice you did not have to force it. You make a decision for your own future without imagining how they would respond. You buy something beautiful for your room. You cook for yourself. You answer a call. You rest before you are desperate. You say no without writing a 12-page apology in your mind. Small things, ordinary things. Yet heartbreak heals in ordinary ways. Grand declarations are easy. Daily self-respect is where the real return happens. Perhaps part of maturity after love ends is learning that intention is a form of self-trust. It is you saying, even if my feelings are loud today, I do not need to follow every feeling into action. It is you saying, even if I do not yet feel strong, I can still choose what honors me. It is you saying, I may not be fully healed, but I am no longer available for what broke me. That is not coldness. That is wisdom beginning to take root. And there is another truth here, one that heartbreak eventually teaches whether we welcome it or not. You cannot build a peaceful life while repeatedly walking back into emotional smoke and calling it devotion. At some point, love for your future must become more persuasive than attachment to your pain. At some point, your own life must become someone worth showing up for. At some point, the question is no longer whether they understand what they did. The question becomes whether you are ready to stop abandoning yourself in order to keep the story alive. So if you are in that tender middle place, where you still ache, but you also know you cannot continue living like this, begin with intention, not perfection. You do not have to become radiant overnight. You do not have to stop crying by Friday. You do not have to turn grief into wisdom before it has finished teaching you. But you can decide that your next steps will not be random. You can decide that your pain will be honored, not obeyed. You can decide that the life ahead of you deserves more than the leftovers of somebody else's indecision. And when you begin to walk that way, with even a little purpose beneath your feet, something steadies. The world may not change all at once. The ache may not disappear on command, but your soul starts to feel less lost inside you. Your steps begin to carry meaning again. Your days stop being only about what ended and slowly become about what is still possible. That is how the path clears, not by erasing the past, but by refusing to let it own every road ahead. In the next part, we will go deeper into another difficult grace of heartbreak. Release what it means to put down the weight. Stop carrying what no longer belongs to you and make room for a life that can breathe again. There comes a point in heartbreak when the pain is no longer only about what happened, it is also about what you are still carrying. The unanswered questions, the replayed scenes, the fantasy of a different ending, the argument you never got to finish, the apology that never arrived, the version of yourself that still believes if you could just understand it completely, then maybe you could finally rest. But sorrow does not always leave because you understand more. Sometimes it begins to loosen because you decide, very quietly, that you can no longer afford to carry everything. Release is one of the hardest things the heart is ever asked to learn. Because letting go is rarely about stopping love on command. It is about putting down what love has become when it is no longer returned with care. It is about loosening your grip on the story that kept injuring you. It is about recognizing that memory can become a burden when you drag it everywhere, asking it to keep proving what the relationship meant. Some grief deserves to be held tenderly. But some grief has become a habit of self-wounding, and if you do not tell the truth about that, you will call your own suffering loyalty. We hold on for so many human reasons. We hold on because release feels like admitting it is truly over. We hold on because part of us still wants to be chosen retroactively. We hold on because if we stop carrying the pain, we worry we will also lose the meaning of what we lived through. We hold on because anger can feel stronger than emptiness, and bitterness can feel easier than grief. We hold on because sometimes resentment is the last thread connecting us to someone who is already gone. But everything you keep carrying shows up in the way you live. It shows up in your posture, in your sleep, in your patience, in your ability to trust a quiet day. It shows up in the way you flinch when someone is kind to you. It shows up in the way you assume disappointment before hope has even had a chance to speak. The body keeps score, yes, but the soul carries residue too, and heartbreak becomes heavier when you are carrying not only the loss itself, but also the self-blame, the unanswered why, the humiliation, the hope that refuses to die, and the private belief that maybe this was all somehow your fault. So let us tell the truth here. Not everything you carry is yours to keep. That guilt you drag around because you stayed too long, it may have taught you something, but it is not meant to become your identity. That shame you feel for loving deeply, for trusting, for seeing potential where there was not yet proof, it may ache in you, but it is not a life sentence. That constant need to explain yourself to the one who misunderstood you, dismissed you, or made your pain feel inconvenient, you do not have to carry that anymore either. Some weights do not strengthen you. They only bend your spirit out of shape. One painful truth many people discover is that they are not only grieving the person, they are also grieving the version of themselves that kept waiting, the version that kept believing one more conversation would fix it, one more chance would soften them. One more act of patience would finally make the other person capable of what they had never consistently given. And when that hope dies, it can feel like losing a future, a role, a purpose. But perhaps part of release is allowing that waiting self to rest. Not with contempt, not with mockery, with mercy. Have you been carrying someone in your mind who has not carried you with the same care in their life? Have you been holding a place for a person who made you live in uncertainty? Have you been treating a wound like a shrine, returning to it not because it heals you, but because it reminds you that something once mattered? These are tender questions, but they matter. Because you cannot become free while calling every chain sentimental. Release does not mean pretending it was all meaningless. It does not mean erasing their name from your history as though your heart was foolish to ever open. Letting go does not mean it meant nothing. It means you are no longer willing to keep bleeding in order to prove that it mattered. It means you honor the lesson without dragging the wreckage. It means you stop reopening the door just to confirm, again, that it still hurts when it closes on you. And yes, there are practical forms of release too. Sometimes release is deleting the thread you only read when you want to punish yourself. Sometimes it is refusing to check whether they have moved on because that knowledge will not save you. Sometimes it is packing away the gifts, not because you are bitter, but because your room deserves to stop feeling like a museum of unfinished grief. Sometimes it is saying to a trusted friend, please do not let me romanticize this when I am lonely. Sometimes release is not graceful at all in the beginning. Sometimes it looks like crying on the kitchen floor because you finally accepted what your heart kept trying to negotiate. There is dignity in that acceptance. More dignity than in clinging to a door that no longer opens. And then there is the release that must happen inside, the deeper one, the quieter one. Releasing the belief that being chosen is what makes you valuable. Releasing the idea that if someone could not love you well, then something must be fundamentally wrong with you. Releasing the fantasy that closure must come from the same hands that created the confusion. Releasing the story that your life can only begin again if they explain themselves properly. Often, closure begins much closer to home. It begins when you stop asking the wound to become your teacher every single day. It begins when you finally say, I may never get the answer I wanted, but I do not need one more bruise in order to believe what happened. There is a kind of self-forgiveness needed here too. Deep and trembling and real, because many broken hearts are harsh with themselves in ways they would never be with another person. They replay every warning sign they missed. They turn hindsight into a whip. They say, I should have known. I should have left sooner. I should have loved myself more. Maybe so. But you are here now, and healing does not grow well in the soil of constant self-punishment. At some point you must say, that was me then, doing what I knew with the hunger and loneliness and hope I had. I am learning now. I am seeing now. I am allowed to become wiser without becoming cruel to myself. That is release too. Putting down the inner voice that keeps turning your pain into prosecution. Sometimes the heart keeps reaching for what the soul has already outgrown. Sometimes the hand keeps holding what life is asking you to set down. Sometimes freedom first feels like grief, because what you are releasing once gave you meaning, identity, rhythm, excitement, hope. But if it is costing you your peace, your clarity, your self-respect, then release is not betrayal. It is loyalty to life. It is the soul choosing air after too long underwater. So I want to ask you, gently but honestly, what are you still carrying that is making your healing heavier? Is it the need to be understood, the hope of reunion, the shame of having stayed, the fear that nothing this intense will ever happen again? Name it. Not to condemn yourself, to free yourself. Name what has been sitting in your chest like a stone. Name what keeps pulling you backward. Name what you are ready, however imperfectly, to stop dragging into tomorrow. Because your next chapter does not need every burden from the last one. Your future does not require your old chains for proof of love. And your heart, tired as it may be, was not made only to survive. It was made to breathe again. In the next part, we will go deeper into faith after heartbreak, not faith as performance or denial, but the quiet courage to move forward before you feel fully ready, and to trust that healing can begin even while you still tremble. After heartbreak, faith can become a difficult word, not because you no longer understand it, but because pain changes how words land in the body. It is one thing to speak of trust when life feels held together. It is another thing entirely to speak of trust when something you prayed over still fell apart, when someone you loved still left, when the future you imagined dissolved in your hands and left you standing in the silence, wondering what exactly you are supposed to believe now. So let us be honest. Faith after heartbreak is not shiny. It is not loud. It is not the kind that always stands tall with a perfect smile and a perfect sentence ready for the room. Sometimes faith after heartbreak is simply this: getting out of bed when sorrow has made the sheets feel safer than the world. Sometimes it is eating when your body has confused grief with emptiness. Sometimes it is refusing to send the message that would place your healing back in the hands of someone who already mishandled it. Sometimes it is saying, through tears, I do not understand this, but I will not let this pain be the end of me. That counts. That matters. One painful truth many people discover is that fear becomes especially persuasive after emotional loss. It begins to speak in the voice of self-protection. It says, do not trust again. It says, do not hope too much. It says, do not believe in anything you cannot control. It says, next time, be colder. Need less, reveal less, love less. And when your heart is raw, that voice can sound almost wise. But fear is not always wisdom. Sometimes it is simply pain trying to keep itself from being touched again. Faith, by contrast, does not ask you to pretend you were not hurt. It does not demand that you deny the wreckage. It does not require you to call everything beautiful before it is true. Real faith is more grounded than that. It says, yes, this wounded me. Yes, I am shaken. Yes, I do not have the full map. But I will not let what broke my heart become the ruler of my future. I will move carefully, perhaps slowly, but I will move. I will not hand my whole life over to fear because one chapter ended in sorrow. That is a sacred kind of courage. Have you noticed how heartbreak can make the world feel unsafe in places that have nothing to do with the relationship itself? You stop trusting your own judgment. You second-guess ordinary decisions. You feel exposed in simple conversations. You assume disappointment before joy has even entered the room. This is why faith after heartbreak is not just spiritual. It is nervous system deep. It is the slow retraining of your inner world to believe that not every silence means abandonment, not every delay means rejection, not every ending means you are unworthy, and not every unknown is a threat. So when we speak of walking by faith now, we are not talking about dramatic certainty. We are talking about the willingness to take one honest step before your feelings catch up. We are talking about applying for the job, though rejection has made you doubt your value. We are talking about saying no to the one who returns with familiar words but unchanged character. We are talking about making plans for a future that your pain tried to convince you would never feel meaningful again. We are talking about trusting that your life still contains goodness, even if your heart has not fully remembered how to receive it yet. Sometimes the heart says, wait until I feel strong. But healing rarely works that way. Often strength is not what comes before movement. It is what grows because of movement. You walk, trembling. You choose, uncertain. You show up, still tender. And only later do you look back and realize that faith had been carrying more of you than you knew. This is why faith after heartbreak must not be confused with denial. Denial says, I am fine, it did not matter, I am over it. Faith says, it mattered deeply, and still I will not drown here. Denial says, I will numb this. Faith says, I will feel this and still believe life has not abandoned me. Denial builds walls and calls them healing. Faith builds inner ground and learns how to stand. And standing may look very ordinary. It may look like keeping your promises to yourself. It may look like going to therapy, or praying honestly instead of politely, or taking long walks and telling the truth while you walk. It may look like resting when your mind wants to spin. It may look like choosing people who feel steady instead of people who feel intoxicating. It may look like trusting boredom more than chaos for a little while, because peace often feels unfamiliar before it feels precious. There is another difficult grace here too. Faith does not always remove fear. Sometimes it simply refuses to let fear hold the pen. You may still worry. You may still have nights when memory knocks hard. You may still wonder whether you will ever love again without carrying your old bruises into the room. But even then, faith can say, you do not need all the answers tonight. You only need enough truth to take tomorrow seriously. And tomorrow, taken seriously enough times, becomes a life. Perhaps part of heartbreak is learning that feeling afraid does not mean you are not healing. It means you are human. It means your heart remembers what it costs to be open. But fear is not the same as guidance. Some people spend years obeying fear and calling it discernment. They tell themselves they are being careful, when in truth they are becoming unavailable to their own lives. Faith invites something gentler and stronger. It says, I can move with wisdom without becoming imprisoned by caution. I can protect myself without abandoning possibility. I can honor what happened without making it the prophecy of everything ahead. And that matters, because after heartbreak, people often wait to feel ready for life again, ready to trust, ready to hope, ready to begin. But readiness is often quieter than expected. Sometimes it is simply the moment you become more tired of your own captivity than afraid of your freedom. The moment you decide that even a trembling step forward is kinder than staying forever in emotional ruins. The moment you stop asking pain for permission to live. So, if your faith feels small right now, let it be small and real. A whispered prayer counts. A deep breath counts. A choice not to go back counts. A decision to keep caring for your life while your heart is still mending counts. Tiny acts of trust are still trust. And often that is how healing begins, not with a trumpet, but with a quiet refusal to surrender your future to what already happened. In the next part, we will move into something equally difficult and necessary: how to begin walking forward again, not as performance, not as pretending, but as a steady return to purpose, dignity, and a life that does not revolve around the wound, adapted from your original source and creative brief. There is a moment in healing when you realize that surviving is no longer enough. You have cried, you have questioned, you have replayed, you have carried the ache like a secret weight under your clothes. You have done what so many broken hearts do, made a home in endurance. And for a while, that may be all you could do. For a while, simply getting through the day was a form of courage. But eventually, if healing is to deepen, something in you begins to ask for more than survival. It begins to ask for movement. Not frantic movement, not performative reinvention, not the kind that says, look at me, I am thriving, while your soul is still bleeding in private. I mean the quieter kind, the truer kind, the kind that says, I do not yet feel whole, but I am ready to stop building my life around what broke me. That is the beginning of walking forward. Walking forward after heartbreak is not the same as forgetting. It is not denial dressed as progress. It is not pretending that the loss no longer matters. It is deciding that grief may walk beside you for a while, but it will no longer steer. It is deciding that memory may visit, but it will not own the house. It is deciding that even though a chapter ended in pain, your whole identity will not remain permanently kneeling at that altar. And this is where many people become afraid. Because once you begin to move forward, you may feel disloyal. Disloyal to what you felt. Disloyal to what you hoped. Disloyal even to the tenderness of your former self. There are hearts that genuinely believe healing is a kind of betrayal, as though finding peace means the love was not real, as though laughter means the grief was exaggerated, as though choosing life means you did not care enough. But that is not true. Healing does not erase love. It restores proportion. It places the loss where it belongs instead of allowing it to swallow everything else. Letting life widen again is not disloyalty, it is recovery. One painful truth many people discover is that they have spent so much time circling the wound that they no longer know what they love outside of it. They know what hurt them. They know what they miss. They know what they wish had happened. They know every detail of the ending. But ask them what still makes them feel alive, and they go quiet. Ask them what future they want, beyond reunion, beyond explanation, beyond closure, and they struggle to answer. This is not because they are empty. It is because heartbreak narrowed the frame. It trained the mind to orbit absence, and part of walking forward is widening the frame again. So what do you love now? Not what did you love with them, not what did you imagine becoming together. What is yours now? What music still reaches you? What place lets your shoulders soften? What kind of morning helps your mind come back to itself? What books steady you? What conversations leave you feeling more honest, not more confused? What kind of home do you want to build inside your own life? These questions matter because heartbreak can make a person forget they are more than the sight of a loss. To walk forward is to begin answering those questions with your choices. Sometimes that looks humble. It looks like cleaning the room you have neglected because sorrow made everything feel pointless. It looks like changing the sheets, drinking water, returning the calls you avoided, going back to the gym, or the garden, or the journal, or the prayer bench, or the morning walk you abandoned when grief made all beauty feel offensive. It looks like making one plan for next week that has nothing to do with the person who left. It looks like tending to the ordinary life that heartbreak told you was no longer sacred. But the ordinary is often where your life returns. Sometimes walking forward means grieving the fantasy one last honest time. Not the person in fragments, not the apologies you imagined, not the version of them you defended to yourself. The fantasy, the imagined relationship, the future you kept trying to resurrect from very little evidence that grief is real too. Some people are not only broken by what happened, they are broken by what never fully happened and still took up so much room in the heart. Mourning what could have been can be harder than mourning what truly was, because possibility does not leave cleanly. It lingers. It argues. It says, but maybe. And part of moving forward is knowing when maybe has become a private form of self-abandonment. Have you been waiting for a sign to begin again? Waiting to feel absolutely free of sadness before you let yourself live? Waiting for some perfect inner certainty before you reclaim your own days? You may wait a very long time if that is the bargain. Life often returns in motion, not before it. Clarity often comes while walking, not while standing still demanding guarantees. You do not need to feel nothing in order to move. You only need to stop making your pain the central authority in every decision. And yes, there will be resistance. The old memories may knock harder the moment you start reclaiming your life. The loneliness may sharpen when you stop feeding it old stories. There may be evenings when you almost convince yourself that going backward would be easier than building something new. This is normal. Healing is not a straight road. It is a living road. Some days you feel strong. Some days an old song undoes you. Some days you think you are finished crying. Then grief appears in the grocery store aisle because you saw the tea they used to drink or heard a laugh that sounded like a forgotten season. Do not mistake those moments for failure. They are not proof that you are back at the beginning. They are proof that the heart heals in layers. Walking forward does not mean you never look back. It means when you do look back, you do so with reverence, not captivity. You see the path with clearer eyes. You stop editing out the hard parts to keep the story beautiful. You let the truth have its full shape. You see where you disappeared. You see where you overgave. You see where you made excuses for what was slowly draining your spirit. And instead of using that knowledge to humiliate yourself, you let it mature you. That is what wisdom does. It does not mock who you were. It teaches who you are becoming. And then something unexpected begins to happen. Your steps get steadier. Not glamorous, steadier. You become less available to confusion, less impressed by intensity without integrity, less tempted by the familiar ache of being almost loved. You start valuing what calms your nervous system, not just what excites your imagination. You become more protective of your peace, not because you are fragile, but because you finally understand its worth. You begin to see that self-respect is not dramatic. It is repetitive. It is built in the quiet decision not to chase what has already shown you its limits. That is purpose beginning to return. Because purpose after heartbreak is not always some grand calling descending out of the sky. Sometimes it is simply the sacred task of becoming fully present in your own life again, to show up, to participate, to create, to rest honestly, to work with integrity, to love friends well, to keep promises to yourself, to stop abandoning your body while trying to rescue a memory, to become someone whose life is not built around yearning for what has already proven incapable of sheltering you. And maybe this is the deeper shift the original message was pointing toward all along. Not just that you walk, but that you walk like your life means something. Like your days are not disposable. Like your pain did not happen to reduce you, but to reveal what can no longer be negotiated away. Your standards, your limits, your longing for truth, your refusal now to call emotional hunger love, your growing willingness to choose what is steady over what is dazzling, that is not small. That is transformation in human clothes. So walk forward, even if today your steps are quiet. Walk forward, even if all you do is choose one truthful action over one familiar wound. Walk forward, even if you are still carrying some sorrow in your chest. Sorrow does not cancel direction. Tears do not disqualify purpose. A trembling beginning is still a beginning. In the next part, we will go deeper into identity after heartbreak, how to rebuild self-worth when love was tied to being chosen, and how to return to yourself without becoming hard, cynical, or lost. One of the most painful things heartbreak can take from a person is not only companionship, but self-recognition. After enough disappointment, enough mixed signals, enough emotional hunger, you can begin to see yourself through the eyes of the one who failed to love you well. And that is a dangerous kind of loss. Because then the injury is no longer only relational, it becomes internal. You start measuring your worth by their inconsistency. You start reading their withdrawal as a verdict. You start mistaking their inability to cherish you for evidence that you were difficult to cherish in the first place. This is how self-worth collapses after heartbreak. Not always in one dramatic instant, but slowly, quietly, in the compromises, in the waiting, in the extra explanations, in how often you made yourself smaller so the relationship would not break. in how much you learn to survive on crumbs and call it gratitude, and how deeply you began to believe that being chosen was the same thing as being valuable. But being chosen and being valuable are not the same. They never were. A person can choose you and still not know how to care for what they chose. A person can desire you and still not know how to protect your peace. A person can say beautiful words and still be emotionally unavailable, inconsistent, avoidant, self-absorbed, or unable to love beyond their own limitations. Their choice does not create your worth, and their failure does not erase it. Yet heartbreak makes this difficult to remember because rejection lands in the oldest, most tender places. It touches childhood wounds. It wakes up fears of not being enough. It stirs the ancient ache of wanting to be seen, held, preferred, kept. So many wounded hearts are not only grieving a relationship, they are grieving the collapse of a private belief that said, if this person finally loves me well, then perhaps I can rest. Perhaps I can believe I matter. Perhaps I can stop feeling so uncertain inside myself. That is a very human longing, but it is a dangerous place to build identity. Because when your worth depends on being chosen, every disappointment becomes existential. Every withdrawal feels like a verdict on your soul. One painful truth many people discover is that they were not just attached to the person. They were attached to what being loved by that person seemed to promise about themselves. Proof, safety, belonging, enoughness. And when the relationship fails, it can feel as though all those things failed too. But the truth is more merciful than that. What failed was not your worth. What failed was a structure that could not carry the weight of what you were asking it to prove. That is why part of healing must involve rebuilding identity from the inside out, not as a slogan, not as shallow self-love language pasted over a devastated heart. Real rebuilding, slow rebuilding, the kind that asks, who am I when I am not trying to be enough for someone who keeps moving the standard? Who am I when I stop performing for love? Who am I when I am no longer organizing my days around being remembered, being missed, being texted back, being finally understood? Those are sacred questions because they mark the beginning of self-return. And this return is not always dramatic. Sometimes it begins in the smallest acts of refusal. You refuse to keep speaking to yourself in the language of rejection. You refuse to call yourself foolish every time memory hurts. You refuse to keep presenting your tenderness as weakness. You refuse to keep interpreting abandonment as proof that you were too much. You begin to understand that perhaps you were not too much at all. Perhaps you were simply asking for depth from someone committed to shallowness. Perhaps you were asking for steadiness from someone who only knew how to visit. Perhaps you were asking for truth from someone who survived by avoiding it. There is relief in that realization, but also grief. Because once you see clearly, you can no longer keep blaming yourself for everything. And for some people, self-blame has become a strange form of control. If it was all your fault, then maybe you could have fixed it. Maybe you could still fix it. Maybe one more insight, one more apology, one more improvement would rewrite the ending. But once you accept that not all losses are fixable through self-correction, you are left with a harder freedom. You must grieve what was never really yours to repair. Have you been trying to become more lovable instead of asking whether what you received was truly love? Have you been exhausting yourself chasing worthiness when the deeper issue was that the relationship kept asking you to abandon yourself in order to remain inside it? Have you spent more time asking how to be chosen than asking whether the version of you doing the choosing was healthy, honest, and awake? These questions are not accusations. They are invitations back to yourself. Because self-worth after heartbreak is not built by convincing yourself you are perfect. It is built by seeing yourself more truthfully. You are human. You are imperfect. You have needs. You have blind spots. You have old wounds that may have shaped what felt familiar. But none of that makes you disposable. None of that means you must accept confusion as intimacy. None of that means you must audition for the right to be treated with consistency, care, and respect. And there is another layer here, one that deserves tenderness. Some people do not fear losing the other person as much as they fear what will happen when they are left alone with themselves. Because heartbreak exposes everything you were using the relationship to avoid. The loneliness, the insecurity, the exhaustion, the dreams you postponed, the parts of your life that quietly atrophied while you were tending a bond that kept hurting you. This is why returning to yourself can feel so uncomfortable at first. You are not only recovering from them, you are meeting yourself again, and perhaps you have not truly sat with yourself in a long time. But this meeting, however awkward, is necessary. You need to know the person who remains when the fantasy falls away. You need to know what calms you, what matters to you, what beauty still moves you, what standards protect your peace, what kind of love your nervous system can actually rest inside. You need to become intimate with your own truth, not just your own pain. Because pain, if you let it, can become the loudest thing about you. But you are more than what hurt you, more than what ended, more than what someone failed to recognize while it was in their hands. Healing may begin when you stop asking, "Why was I not enough?" and start asking, "Why did I keep handing my worth to someone else's limitations?" That question can change a life because it shifts you from rejection into responsibility, not responsibility for what they did, but responsibility for what you will no longer permit. It helps you understand that dignity is not an abstract virtue. It is a daily practice. It is how you answer the text that arrives too late. It is whether you keep the boundary once loneliness starts bargaining. It is whether you tell the truth about what something cost you. And slowly, self-worth begins to feel less like a performance and more like a homecoming. You stop reaching for people who only light up when you are convenient. You stop translating mixed signals into promises. You stop treating your own needs as embarrassing interruptions. You become less willing to trade peace for possibility, less willing to call emotional instability passion, less willing to kneel before potential while reality keeps starving you. That is not cynicism. That is discernment growing roots. In the next part, we will move into the final stretch of this healing path. How to carry your tenderness forward without returning to old patterns. How to love life again without denying what it costs to heal. And how to walk into the future with both softness and strength intact. There is a quiet fear many people carry after heartbreak, though they do not always say it aloud. They are not only afraid of being hurt again, they are afraid of what healing will ask of them. Afraid that if they truly let go, they will become unrecognizable to themselves. Afraid that if they open again, they will repeat the old pattern. afraid that if they harden, they will lose something beautiful, afraid that if they stay soft, they will be harmed. And so they stand in between, unsure whether the wiser path is to protect the heart or trust it once more. But perhaps the deeper work is neither hardening nor naivete. Perhaps the deeper work is learning how to remain tender without becoming available for harm. Learning how to keep your softness without surrendering your standards. Learning how to carry a heart that has known grief without making grief its permanent language. This may be one of the most sacred transformations heartbreak can offer, not the destruction of your tenderness, but its refinement. Because tenderness is not the problem. Your depth was not the mistake. Your willingness to love was not the flaw. The problem was never that you cared too much. The problem was where that care kept being poured. It was the places you offered devotion that could not hold it with reverence. It was the people who enjoyed access to you without honoring the responsibility of that access. It was the pattern of mistaking emotional intensity for emotional safety. That is a painful lesson, yes, but it is also one that can save the rest of your life if you let it. One painful truth many people discover is that they do not actually want love if love means peace. They want familiarity. And familiarity, for some wounded hearts, has been built around unpredictability, longing, overthinking, proving, chasing, waiting. That is why when something or someone is calm, honest, available, and kind, it can feel almost too still, too plain, too easy, not because it is wrong, but because chaos once taught your body that struggle was the evidence of importance. So part of carrying your tenderness forward is retraining your heart to recognize that peace is not emptiness. Consistency is not dullness. Safety is not a lack of passion. Sometimes the truest love does not feel like falling. It feels like being able to breathe. Have you ever confused the ache of uncertainty with the depth of connection? Have you ever called something profound simply because it consumed your thoughts? Have you ever mistaken the nervous system's alarm for destiny? These are the questions that help protect your future. Because once you have been broken open by love, you cannot afford to return to life unchanged. You do not need to become suspicious of everyone, but you do need to become honest about what your body once called home. And honesty will ask new things of you. It will ask you to slow down where you once rushed in. It will ask you to observe rather than fantasize. It will ask you to notice whether someone's words create hope while their actions create confusion. It will ask you to stop glorifying people who only know how to almost love. It will ask you to pay attention to how you feel after contact, not only during it. Do you feel steadier, clearer, more yourself? Or smaller, anxious, hungry, doubtful, off balance? These questions matter because the body often knows long before the mind is ready to admit what kind of bond it is standing in. Carrying tenderness forward also means learning to let life be sweet again in places that have nothing to do with romance. This is one of healing's quiet miracles. One day, the world begins to return by way of small things. A morning breeze, a friend's laughter, a meal you actually taste, music that does not wound you, the clean feeling of a room after you have cared for it, the comfort of your own bed, the relief of not checking, the ordinary peace of no longer being entangled in someone else's confusion. These things may seem small beside the grand ache of heartbreak, but do not underestimate them. The soul returns through ordinary doors. And when it does, you may notice that your life begins to gather meaning in new ways. Not because the pain was worth it in some tidy, sentimental sense, but because you are no longer wasting all your life force trying to force love out of what could only imitate it. You have energy now for what is real, for friendship, for creativity, for work that matters, for rest that restores, for prayer that tells the truth, for joy that does not have to be stolen between moments of uncertainty. This is not flashy healing. It is better. It is grounded healing. The kind that makes a life livable again. There may still be moments when memory reaches for you. Perhaps that is simply part of being human. A place, a song, a date on the calendar, a scent in the air, a version of yourself you suddenly miss. Healing does not always erase these things, but it changes your relationship to them. You can remember without collapsing. You can feel tenderness without reopening the contract with pain. You can bless what taught you and still refuse to return to what diminished you. That is growth. That is freedom maturing. And let us say something plainly here. Not every future love deserves the punishment for what past love did. But neither should future love receive blind access just because you are lonely for softness. This is the balance. Soft heart, clear eyes. Open spirit, grounded boundaries. Kindness without self-abandonment. Compassion without confusion. Hope without fantasy. That is what it means to walk into the future with both softness and strength intact. Perhaps part of becoming whole again is realizing that your heart was never meant to be either a fortress or an open wound. It was meant to be a living place, a wise place, a place where love can enter, but not at the expense of truth, a place where grief can visit, but not rule, a place where memory can be honored, but not obeyed. A place where tenderness remains, not because life never hurt you, but because hurt no longer gets the final word. So if you are standing at that threshold now, somewhere between the life that broke you and the life that is beginning to call you forward, go gently, but go. Do not let fear convince you that staying half alive is safer than healing. Do not let past hunger teach you to distrust peace when it comes. Do not let old longing make you kneel again before what cannot love you with steadiness. You have come too far for that. Your spirit has paid too much for that. Your future deserves better than a recycled wound dressed up as another chance. And maybe this is the final blessing hidden inside that old image from the original source, the idea of salt in your shoes, of walking with something sacred beneath your feet. Maybe now it means this, that you move through the world remembering your value, protecting your peace, and honoring what your heart has learned. That you let your steps be seasoned with clarity. That you preserve what is most precious in you, that you cleanse your path of what no longer belongs there, that you stop walking like someone trying to be chosen and start walking like someone already entrusted with a life worth living. You do not need to become fearless to move forward. You do not need to become unfeeling to become wise. You do not need to erase your past to enter your future. You only need to keep walking with truth beneath your feet. One day, not all at once, but surely, you will look around and realize that peace no longer feels foreign. Your own company no longer feels like exile. Love no longer looks like confusion. And the person you were trying so hard to recover was never fully gone. She was waiting beneath the ache, He was waiting beneath the grief. You were there all along, asking to be returned to, with honesty, with dignity, with care. So walk on now, dear heart. Walk with your scars, but not in chains. Walk with your tenderness, but not without discernment. Walk with your memory, but not under its rule. Walk with faith, with release, with intention, with self-respect. Walk like someone whose pain has told the truth and whose soul has chosen life anyway. Walk like someone who knows that healing is not betrayal of love. It is loyalty to what is still living inside you. And walk as though the ground beneath you can feel the difference. Because it can.